This video contains flashing lights and colors.
The concept of a roller coaster is much older than you think. Out of the thousands of roller coasters that have ever been built, only a few end up as household names. Many over the years have unfortunately fallen by the wayside into obscurity. Today, we're going to highlight some of the older attractions that a lot of people don't talk about nowadays, starting at the 1940s and ending at the 1840s. Now, I've talked about a few of these attractions before, but some of them I haven't. Either way, we're putting together a reverse chronological top 10 list of some of the strangest old vintage roller coasters ever built.
Now, before we get started, I want to give a big shout out to this video's sponsor, Creamy Crypto Punch.
Welcome to the new and improved Crypto Crazy, where we have discussions on how you can get involved with the blockchain and exclusive interviews with pioneers of the industries of cryptocurrency and AI. Earn your way to thousands of different cryptocurrencies today.
No. Happy April Fool's Day. And if it's not April Fool's Day when you're watching this, apologies for wasting time. Now, let's get on with the video.
Number 10. Loopingbahn at Austria's Vienna Prater. This right here was a double looping wooden water coaster with a beer ad on it. It was also the first roller coaster on Earth to have two inversions on the same track. Over at Vienna Prater, a coaster named Loopingbahn tried to revolutionize the very concept of an amusement ride. Now, this coaster had two back-to-back vertical loops. The first was out in the open, and the second was enclosed inside a wooden structure. Now, as if two loops weren't enough, the train would hit a splashdown section shortly after inverting. If I'm not mistaken, this qualifies it as the first and only water coaster ever built to go upside down. Now, this was unquestionably ambitious, but unfortunately, that ambition was perhaps a little too ahead of its time. Even though the ride reportedly operated without major incidents, people were apparently too scared to go ride it. It was one of those attractions that people like to watch more than actually get in line for. One park official supposedly summed it up by saying, quote, "If only 2 of 10 dare to go, we'll have to close down. I can't live on the many who watch." So yeah, people enjoyed looking at it, but looking at it didn't pay the bills. And that's why after only about 2 years of operation, the Loopingbahn closed down. But hey, at least it lasted longer than Sora 2 did. Number 9. Bob-Banen at Denmark's Tivoli Gardens. This small Danish amusement park is one of the most historically significant places in the amusement industry. Its history is insanely rich. Yet in spite of this, there's one ride that seems to be completely obscure. Now with this coaster, I really wish I had more to say about it because it looks absolutely surreal. This coaster was said to operate around 1937. Now according to the roller coaster database, this was a powered bobsled coaster with rocking cars. This basically would have made it an insane precursor to the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train at the Magic Kingdom and Shanghai Disneyland. From the look of things, the rocking mechanisms seem to be those tripod-looking things that are between each car. Honestly, I'm not exactly sure how the train is being powered. Typically, powered coasters require a third rail on the track to help generate electricity. Now, I think that line in the middle of the trough is supposed to be the third rail, but aside from this one image, there are no other photos or videos of this attraction. You could easily call it a lost media roller coaster. Number 8. The Reverser at Utah's Saltaire. Built in 1922, this ride, also known as the Hooper Reverser, was one of those coasters that really shows how innovative the decade's inventions were. And the wild thing is, it could have easily been lost to time. Over 100 years ago, Thomas D. Hooper filed a full design with the U.S. Patent Office in 1914 describing exactly how it worked. At first, this looks like a simple roller coaster with a drop and a compact layout, but if you look closely, you'll see that the track is far from ordinary. Now, instead of a simple set of 2 rails and a simple set of wheel assemblies, Hooper designed a unique double set of rails. These rails formed short curved sections built into an otherwise straight section of track. The train itself rides on a direction control wheel. The rear wheels are set up to follow the straight section of track, while the front wheels are forced into one of these curved sections. As the train enters one of these switchbacks, the front of the car is pulled along the curved rails while the rear keeps pushing ahead. All the while, the wheel assemblies allow the train to rotate above. Because the rear of the car is still moving straight, it's able to pull ahead of the front while the front is going through that curve. so by the time the train exits the element, the car has physically reversed itself on the track without ever switching momentum. It would do this repeatedly, ending up going back to the station facing forwards. Now, Mr. Hooper was no dumbass and thought ahead in terms of safety. He actually included guardrails and special wheel flanges to keep everything aligned during the maneuver. It's such a bizarre concept that it feels like a prototype you'd see on display at IAAPA. Unfortunately, the original Utah installation has a tragic ending. Documentation is scarce, and there's only a single known photo. This is because shortly after its opening, the ride was destroyed in a fire in 1925. Surprisingly enough, it actually appeared in the Roller Coaster Tycoon series. Now, although the concept was never used on a roller coaster again, the idea of changing orientation without changing direction was reused at Shanghai Disneyland. On Pirates of the Caribbean: Battle for Sunken Treasure, the boats rotate while traveling in the same direction using a similar mechanism. It's pretty wild how old concepts can randomly pop up again. Number 7. The Spiral Airship at the Pike in Long Beach, California. Now, first of all, I want to give a big shout out to Reddit user Imaginary Infinity for the insane research they did on this coaster. What you're looking at right here is likely one of the earliest suspended coasters ever built, though it may not be the first, as we'll explain in a later entry. According to Imaginary Infinity's research, it was known as the Airship Spiral Way and later referred as the Spiral Airship. It first opened in 1910 at the Pike Amusement Zone in Long Beach, California. This project was mainly spearheaded by two engineering brothers, A.T. Smith and A.F. Smith. But instead of roaming through the Mushroom Kingdom stomping on Koopas, these brothers were experienced in engineering monorail systems. They would incorporate the same kind of track onto this coaster. Also backing the project was a man named R.L. Bisbee, a local restaurateur who helped get the coaster funded and constructed. It's pretty funny when you think about it, because imagine Gordon Ramsay funding a coaster. At the time, it was heavily promoted, and one newspaper even claimed that pretty much everyone in Los Angeles had heard of it. Construction began in 1910, and though it did face a couple of delays, it did manage to open in June of that year. Six Flags could really learn a thing or two from this story. The track layout was certainly bizarre, as it was literally just a big downward spiral. It looked like something that was AI generated. Now, while it is known in many enthusiast circles as Bisbee's Spiral Airship, that's actually a source of contention. Early on, it was called the Airship Spiral Way and later known as just the Spiral Airship. The reason it was labeled Bisbee's Spiral Airship in old press materials was just because Bisbee was the one who funded it. It's like if you get beef Wellington at Gordon Ramsay's restaurant. The restaurant can refer to it as Gordon Ramsay's Beef Wellington, but the dish itself is not literally called Gordon Ramsay's Beef Wellington. Unfortunately, this is where the history of the coaster cuts off. There were reportedly plans to build more of these coasters across the state, including a location in Venice Beach. These plans, though, were canceled for unspecified reasons. Only one was ever built, and it would close sometime around 1915. Number 6. Loop the Loop at Ohio's Olentangy Park. By the early 1900s, engineers were trying to figure out how to make the concept of a looping roller coaster work. Inventor Lena Beecher, who was a pioneer on early looping roller coasters, previously saw failure with his flip-flap railway at Paul Boyton's Sea Lion Park on Coney Island. After the brutal 12G forces of the original flip-flap railway, Beecher went back to the drawing board. Soon enough, he discovered that the circular shape of the loop was the main problem. So sometime after the flip-flap railway, inventor Edwin Prescott designed his own version of the looping coaster with steel track and a more teardrop-shaped or clothoid loop. This coaster also consisted of two side-by-side tracks to help with capacity. Again, Six Flags could learn a thing or two. In 1904, Beecher designed a new version of his looping coaster and brought it to Ohio 4 years later in 1908. More specifically, he built it at Olentangy Park, hoping to see some success there. Beecher borrowed the idea of a clothoid loop from Edwin Prescott. To be fair to Mr. Beecher, this new loop shape did help make the new ride less brutal. The shape spread out the forces more evenly, and it was less uncomfortable. But just because it was less uncomfortable didn't mean it was, well, comfortable, and it didn't mean that the design had been perfected. It was like being punched in the face versus being punched in the face and kicked in the balls in unison. One writer at the time summed it up perfectly, saying, quote, "Myself and two others went around the loop-the-loop. Once was enough. Capacity was a huge issue, with just a single track and only 4 riders at a time. Even worse, there was even a reported neck injury. Soon enough, the ride's lack of popularity doomed it to the obscure Ohio history books, and it closed on an unspecified date. Still, it's nice that it was documented and that there are still photos of it. Number 5. The Backety-Back Don't Talk Back Scenic Railway at Canada's Crystal Beach and Missouri's Del Mar Garden. Okay, the Don't Talk Back part wasn't part of the name, but you've got to admit it does roll off the tongue. Nowadays, going backwards on a roller coaster is super common, especially with the relevancy of shuttle, switch track, and swing launch coasters that we've seen in recent years. But before the days of Pantheon at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, a coaster managed to switch directions without the use of the former's fancy switch track system. Now this sounds impossible, but you'd be surprised. Built in 1909 at Crystal Beach and later at Del Mar Gardens, the Backety-Back Scenic Railway is one of the strangest early coasters ever built. At first, this attraction operated like your normal everyday wooden coaster, but at one point in the track, the train would ascend an open-ended incline until it lost momentum. This sounds like a typical shuttle coaster, but instead of rolling back the same way, the track did something pretty surreal. On the descent, the train lowers into a lower track segment that passed directly underneath the segment it just traveled on. Despite what you might think, the designers didn't master the art of no-clipping into the scenery. Instead, the secret was in the wheels. According to John H. Brown's patent, the cars had the usual flanged wheels that sat on the rails, but they also had a second set known as rollers. As the train approached the incline, those rollers would engage with a separate set of rails that went alongside the main ones. Once that happened, the normal wheels were effectively lifted off of the track, with the rollers taking over. Admittedly, it's pretty hard to picture in your head, and there's no known footage of the ride or any clear images of the mechanism in action. On the bright side, we do have a good idea of what this kind of switch track may have looked like. As it turns out, the Intamin first-generation drop tower has a similar mechanism. This allows the ride vehicle to dip underneath the track and return to the bottom of the main tower. You can see it in action in this clip, with these rails acting as the ones the rollers would have been on. Another early 20th century coaster that was way ahead of its time. Number 4. Whirl Fly at New York's Henderson Walk, part of Brooklyn's Coney Island. Just like Bob-Banen, only one image related to the ride is known to exist. Unfortunately, there are no photos of it, and instead, there's only this postcard illustration. This ride is so obscure that you would easily think that it was one of those bizarre concepts that was just never built. But according to an article in the Brooklyn Eagle from 1907, it was one of the park's attractions at some point. This right here is the only bit of evidence that this attraction ever existed in a physical form. Now I do think it's odd that there are no patents available and no images of such a weird looking roller coaster. You'd think that they would at least send photographers there. But why would they go out of their way to make a postcard of a ride that didn't exist? After all, the internet didn't exist back then. Its existence certainly is debatable, but for the sake of this video, I'd like to think that it did exist. Number 3. Cannon Coaster, also at Coney Island, but on an independent vendor. You know how the Donkey Kong roller coaster gives the illusion of jumping the track? Well, believe it or not, there was a coaster that actually did jump the track, or at least it managed to get built and tested. Designed by a man named George Francis Meyer, this coaster featured a large cannon facade that the track would go up and through the barrel of. Originally, the barrel wasn't just for decoration. You see, the plan was for the train to zoom out of the cannon, clear a gap in the rails, and land on a separate section of track on the other side. Now this sounds absolutely laughable by modern safety standards, but they actually tried in earnest to make it work. During testing, they used sandbags instead of passengers, and the results were mixed. Sometimes the car made it across, but a lot of times it didn't, and the sandbags on board were likely killed instantly. There's a reason nobody has actually tried to have a coaster jump one section of track to another. It's just not safe. Now, unless they wanted to make a turn-of-the-century version of Jackass, this idea was always going to lead to failure. So soon enough, the gap was filled in with a normal piece of track, turning the jump into a standard section of the ride. In this form, the coaster operated until 1907, and the idea of a coaster jumping the track was put on hold for a while. Number 2. Aerial Glide at England's Shipley Glen. It is uncertain when exactly this ride first opened, either the late 1800s or at the very start of the turn of the century. Depending on how early it opened, it might have operated during the reign of Queen Victoria herself. Though it looks like something Uncle Fred would have made in his tool shed with some old playground equipment, many consider it to be the first suspended roller coaster ever built. Passengers basically sat in a small seat that hung beneath the track. The layout itself was incredibly simple. A short drop, a right-hand turn, a straight section, and that was basically the entire ride. Now, if you got a chance to ride this before it closed, you may remember how rudimentary it was. There were no seatbelts, and instead of brakes, ride operators had to physically catch the car and bring it to a stop. Originally, the ride was designed to carry 2 passengers at once, but over time, the structure was said to have weakened significantly. So eventually, it was limited to just 1 rider with a strict weight limit of around 168 pounds or just over 76 kilograms. Towards the end of its run, those who rode it described it as feeling extremely unstable, with the whole structure shaking throughout. By the early 2000s, the aerial glide was in deplorable condition, and so the park had to make a tough decision, either restore it or remove it, and both weren't cheap. For a while, they just left it abandoned until it was finally torn down in 2004. Today, the site is just part of someone's backyard. Wouldn't it be crazy if whoever lived here was watching this video right now? Number 1. The Centrifugal Railway at various UK locations. Now we're gonna completely crash out and rewind all the way back to before the Civil War. Yes, we're going all the way back to the 1840s, 1842 to be exact. This coaster consisted of a simple layout where a single car goes downhill, navigates a loop, and goes back up. Believe it or not, this coaster actually wasn't meant to be an amusement ride at first. Instead, it was more like a science exhibit that people could watch instead of ride. Specifically, it was a live demonstration of centrifugal forces. For apparent safety reasons, they didn't just put people on board at first. According to an article by Guinness World Records, the coaster was tested with sandbags and even a monkey before people were allowed to board. It was first shown off at the Manchester Hall of Science, but the exhibit's popularity led it to traveling across the UK to other cities like Liverpool and Belfast. It also had a brief 2-week run at the Hull Zoological Gardens, according to the roller coaster database. Unfortunately, this is another example of a ride being way too ahead of its time. Because this was before the days of the clothoid loop, the loop on this ride was a perfect circle. It had no gradual transition of forces, and it was likely very uncomfortable. Shockingly enough, there are no documented injuries that were caused by this ride. Actually, that's not true. I actually came across a newspaper article from 1843 that documents a serious accident. Apparently, a woman who was riding a centrifugal railway fell out and the car landed on top of her, breaking her thigh and giving her other serious injuries. This is why upstop wheels were invented. Surprisingly, the novelty was said to quickly wear off, and it would be decades before a looping coaster was attempted again. It's just crazy to think of how the vertical loop was pretty much invented, and people just went, it's a novelty. But then again, they said the same thing about the printing press and the iPad. It just goes to show how innovations don't always get immediate praise. Now it's time for the comment shoutout program. This is where I take 5 random comments from my last video and read them out. These comments come from my video on Rock and Roller Coaster. ReadSpace8267 says, it's worth noting that there is a VR version of Muppet Vision 3D coming to headsets. As of now, the release date has not been confirmed. The Cassie B says, I don't understand the Muppets retheme for a TV show that got cancelled. Should have been a Goofy movie. It sets it up perfectly. Old Granny 477 says, the first time I rode Rock and Roller Coaster, I passed out. When I woke up, I was in the middle of the ride. My wild grandma was next to me. She kept asking if I was okay. When I wasn't answering, she was like, yeah, she's a goner. Doodle McDeedle says, oh my god, I still have a roll of the Kiss Hello Kitty toilet paper, ha 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 ha. And Sophie Hansel 2017 says, if there was a Queen version of the ride, you would get greeted by an animatronic of guitarist Dr. Sir Brian May. If you want to see your words in my next video, leave a comment down below and it may be selected. Please note though that inflammatory or spam comments will not be read. Thank you all so much, and if you want to support me on Patreon, you can do so once again at the link in the description. Thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media on Instagram and Facebook, or you can check out my website at themeparkcrazy.com. And I'm on TikTok. This is Theme Park Crazy, and I'll see you all next time.